Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Real Life. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. The latest is, I've made a sequel to Wastes of Veldmar. This is Defensive Veldmar. I've already introduced the set, done some design stories, sort of a preview. Now we're into the real meat. This is going card by card, analyzing for the limited environment, as well as some thoughts about constructed. So we're going to do white today. Get yourself a drink, get cozy, and let's discuss all of the white cards, mono white, of Defensive Veldmar. Starting with Aerial Technician. So this is a 3-mana common Human Artificer. It's a 2/2, has flying and Bulwark 1. Bulwark 1 means whenever this creature attacks, it gets +0/+1 until end of turn. So it blocks as a 2/2, attacks as a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you banish 1, exile the top card of your library, and create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. So most cards like this that are like a 2/2 flyer attached to a token, these have generally been really good in Limited. Usually they're one of the better performing cards of the set. As for how this one fits into the different factions, this one has no special synergy with the Consortium. You could use it if you need a 3-drop. You just need some blockers. For the Zarnik collective, that's white, blue, green, this banishes a card from your library, and they have some things that play off synergizing with that. So it can benefit Zarnik. For the Nulvir cult, white, black, green, this gives you 2 bodies to sacrifice for their Aristocrats theme. For the Roka Guild, this gives you an artifact creature, and they've got a theme of artifacts matter. Those 4 groups really make up the core of what white is going to pair with in this set. You could also try to pair white with the colorless faction, but this card wears a bunch of different hats. It's good in all the different archetypes for different reasons. So yeah, this is a really square deal of a card. In terms of limited ratings, out of like 0 to 5, this is probably about a 3.0. Pretty sure it always makes your deck. Isn't necessarily the strongest role player among the commons in your deck, but it's right up there. Next up, we've got a mythic rare. This is Alir the Faithful. So she is a 5-mana, 2 white, 3 colorless, legendary creature angel cleric. She's a 5/5. She has first strike, flying, lifelink, and protection from Eldrazi, and from horrors, and from nightmares. So she's obviously a callback to Baneslayer Angel, but she's got protection from creatures that matter within the context of this set, more so. It's not that there aren't demons and dragons, but demons and dragons aren't the enemy in this case. All the factions are working together to try to repel the invaders. And that's who she has protection from. She'll be a bomb in Limited, of course. The double white cost keeps her from being a 5, I think, where you would run her no matter what. If you had a deck with no mana fixing and no white in it, and you got her in pack 3, I don't know that you could shove her into the deck at that point. But she's probably up there around like a, 4 or 4.5. There's no direct card advantage, but that doesn't matter if she's invulnerable to most of the creatures in the format and just wins the game with 10-point life swings. where they take 5 and you gain 5. As far as constructed, maybe. You know, cards like this have been tapering off a bit in constructed. Even though she is an amazing battlefield presence, she doesn't leave anything behind. So if she gets killed, you're not left with any cards that replaced her, or any board presence that leaves behind her. So, you know, I'm not sure if a card like this still has what it takes to see constructed play nowadays. We'll see. Consortium Jailer. This is a common. We have a 1/3 human wizard. Costs white and 2 colorless. When this enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Consortium Jailer leaves the battlefield. So, being removal on a body, of course you're going to play it in limited. It's going to be pretty great there. Obviously they'll get their thing back if they manage to deal with this guy. But if they never do, then it was an amazing play. And if they at some point manage to get it back, at least you got tempo in the meantime. So, as far as constructed, the stat line on this creature is not very relevant. You know, I don't know if a tempo play like this in a constructed game where this might get swept up later with a board sweeper. I don't know that a 1/3 had enough board impact, even though it took something of theirs off the field. So, I'm inclined to say maybe not quite good enough for constructed. Probably, you know, like a 3.5 in limited or something. Consortium Power Mage. This is a 2/2 elf wizard for a white and a colorless. She's an uncommon. And she has the activated ability, pay 1 tap, add white, blue, black, or red. Spend this mana only to cast an artifact, battle, enchantment, instant, or sorcery spell. So she kind of represents what the Consortium cares about here. They don't care so much about creatures. They probably used to care about planeswalkers in the past when they were run by Nicol Bolas. But since they've become more isolated in the last several years, caring about planeswalkers has tapered off. This is a great mana fixer if you have a spell-heavy deck. And it doesn't just have to be instants and sorceries. There are battles in the set. There are artifacts to go around. There's a few enchantments. So, if you're playing that kind of a deck, then this will do some great mana fixing for you and give you a relevant body on the field at 2 mana. You know, nothing exciting, but nothing embarrassing either. So for limited, I would say this is, you know, kind of your bread and butter sort of a card. If you need the mana fixing, I'd say this is probably at least a 2.5. And if you don't need the mana fixing, it probably drops off to more like a 2. 2 drops are always pretty relevant and limited. Consortium Researcher. This is a 1/4 elf wizard for a white and 2 colorless, uncommon. When this enters, you banish 4. Exile the top 4 cards of your library. You may put 1 artifact, battle, enchantment, instant, or sorcery card from among them into your hand. That's a pretty wide swath of card types. If you put an instant or sorcery into your hand this way, you sacrifice a permanent. That's because white is not really supposed to be doing this for instants and sorceries. So white gets a little bit punished for choosing an instant or sorcery here. If no card was put into your hand this way, if you whiffed, you create a treasure token. So all the way around, you're getting value. You're getting either, you know, mana ramp and mana fixing, where you're getting card selection, or you're getting card advantage of a sort, where you've got a body and a card in hand. For For limited, I would think this is a really solid card to just kind of churn through the deck, fix your mana sometimes, find you the card you need. So I would call it probably a 2.5 in limited. I'd say it's pretty good there. In constructed, you can build exactly the kind of deck where you find the hits that you want off of it, and that could bump it up to being constructed playable. Consortium Turret. This is a 4-mana instant, white and 3 colorless. It's a common. You destroy target attacking creature, banish 1, you exile the top card of your library, and then you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So this is actually pretty good. You're getting a removal spell. It's not the cheapest for its effect, but it gets you a card draw. Most removal spells don't also draw you a card. In fact, some of them will somehow cost you a card. So, with the fact that this one replaces itself, I would say this is going to be pretty great in limited. I think it's too clunky for constructed, though. Dazzling Beauty is a reprint from a long time ago. It's a 3-mana instant, white and 2 colorless. It's uncommon. You cast it only during the declare blocker step. Target unblocked attacking creature becomes blocked. And the reminder text says it works on creatures that can't be blocked. You draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So this is kind of a fog effect. You can stop the opponent from dealing damage to you, as long as it doesn't have trample. Beware of trample. This could be especially good at stopping a menace creature, something that's hard to block, hard to get in the way of. Yeah, so evasive things like menace and flying, or things that are annoying to block like death touch. You get to stop that creature from dealing its damage for a turn by blocking it with this spell, and it replaces itself with a card. It's not the world's most powerful card. It probably sees no constructed play, but it's just a fun old card to bring back into modern times. It's probably a bit filler in terms of limited, but anything that cycles through the deck for you is at least okay to include. You know, like a 1 or a 1.5 kind of a rating. Doomed Thopter. This is a 2/1 artifact creature, Thopter. For a white and a colorless, it is an uncommon with flying. When Doomed Thopter dies, you banish 1, then you create a trash token. And the trash token's a colorless artifact token named Trash, has pay 1, tap, sacrifice this artifact, mill 1, then surveil 1. So the mill is always random, but the surveil can give you some card selection. And there are some ways that filling your graveyard can be handy. So this card is a pretty solid flying creature. It's especially good in the Zarnik collective, that's white, blue, green, because it does the self-banishing, and it also gives you a trash token. They care about both of those things. It also would be quite good in Roka, white, red, green, because they have the Artifacts Matter theme. And finally, it's not bad in Nullfear because they have an Aristocrats theme, and this does something when it dies. So again, this is a card that is a workhorse for what the different color combinations want to be doing in Limited. I would say this card pretty much always makes your deck if you're in white. So I would hazard to give this a 3. I think so. Maybe a 3.5, probably a 3. Exchange to Energy. It's a 2-mana instant in white. It's an uncommon. Exile target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. That permanent's controller draws a card. So we saw a removal spell earlier that cost 2 more mana than this, but you got to draw the card. Now, this costs 2 less, and it exiles something, and it doesn't have to be attacking, but the opponent draws the card. Which one you think is better? They probably both have their moments where they're good for your deck. I would say this one being just 2 mana makes it much stronger in terms of tempo. In terms of card advantage, it's going the complete opposite direction of the other one. So, this is a very serviceable piece of removal. Since it's drawing your opponent cards, I don't know if you want to run like 5 copies of it, if you could even get 5 copies of it. But it certainly cures what ails you in the moment. False Leyline, this is a rare. 2 white and 5 colorless enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, return target artifact, enchantment, or land card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then banish 1. You exile the top 1 card of your library. So this is more of a constructed card than it is a limited card. Now, I would say if you're in maybe Roka Guild and you have a lot of artifact creatures that you're running in your deck, that you could make this work for you in limited. There are some big artifact creatures in the format. So it's not impossible this could be good for your limited deck. But this is much more so maybe a piece for constructed, where you either ramp or trick this card into play somehow, and then this piece starts reanimating all the other stuff out of your graveyard for you. It's an interesting card. It's pretty slow at 7 mana, so it's probably leaning a little bit more towards a more casual format, commander, something like that. Fanatic of Thune. Thune is the name of the Eldrazi Titan who heads up the colorless faction. So in this case, we've got an Angel Horror. It is a 3/1 for a white and 2 colorless. It's an uncommon, has flying. And when this enters, you banish 1, then you create a Quintessence token. And Quintessence is a colorless enchantment token named Quintessence. You can sack it for a colorless mana, or you can pay 2 and sack it to draw a card. So, a little bit like a clue, a little bit like a treasure. It doesn't make any color of mana, though. This card is strong. You get a 3 power flyer for 3 mana, and it also gives you Quintessence, which you can ramp to more expensive spells on a later turn, or it nets you the card back, like a clue does, just by drawing a card. Either way, this is a very strong package, and I think you'll find that with a lot of the cards that make Quintessence, they probably punch above their weight class a little bit because of how strong Quintessence is. So, I would say a card like this is, handily a 3.0, probably a 3.5. Flanking Gorillas. This is a common 1/1 human warrior for 2 in white. Sorry, meaning a white and a colorless. It has flash and lifelink. When this enters, target creature you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. It can target itself. So, a flash 1/1 lifelinker for 2 would be nothing special. But watch out for this card. I highlighted it in my other video, so I don't want to go over it too long here. Just be aware it can be a 3/3 flash lifelink blocker, or it can come down on your turn and be a combat trick. Do not underestimate this card. I think this is easily a 3.0. Fuel-Starved Zeppelin. We have a vehicle here. Vehicles are not very common in the setting, but there are a couple of them. So this is a 3/4 artifact vehicle for a white and 3 colorless. It's a common. It has Defender and Flying. It crews for 1. So it's not a creature until at least one creature of yours that has 1 power or greater taps to crew it. Then it turns into a creature until end of turn. You can also pay 2 and sacrifice a non-token permanent, and it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn, and it may attack as though it didn't have Defender. And you create a trash token, which it has to have non-token permanents to sacrifice, so the trash tokens can't feed it. This is a pretty interesting card in terms of being an engine card. You know, converting one resource into another. So it's a pretty solid blocker. If you have the mana and permanents to spare, it's a pretty good attacker. That would put it a little bit more towards Nulvir. White, black, green, they're the aristocrats. But Zarnik might be interested in trying to get this thing to work because it makes trash. And then, since it's an artifact that can produce trash, maybe Roka Guild would be interested in trying to get it to work too. So again, this is a white card that has a lot of cross synergies. That being said, as a 4-drop and being a vehicle with Defender, I don't think this one is as critical as some of the other cards we've looked at. I think it's entirely playable. So, you know, I think I would easily give this a 2.0. For a deck that's really firing on all cylinders with this thing, I think it's, you know, probably more like a 2.5 or a 3. If you're really getting every piece of it to work. Heal. This is a reprint. It was 1 white, instant. It's common. Prevent the next 1 damage that would be dealt to any target this turn. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. We have not seen cards that prevent damage much for a long time. Technically, they still print protection once in a while. Sometimes damage prevention shows up on a rare. You know, like if Gideon Jura turns into a creature, then like prevent all damage that will be dealt to him, yada yada. But in terms of this kind of thing, where it appears on like a cleric that can tap to prevent damage or a combat trick, we haven't seen much in a long time. So this is a really, really minor trick. I'd say it would be best used in combat at a moment where it can keep your creature alive. Hopefully, you know, you would have traded in combat and now your creature survives and their creature dies. But as long as it has saved something, then that's pretty good. You can also just use this to prevent damage to yourself. And if there was a creature that had an on-damage trick that it does, then if it doesn't deal the damage to you, obviously that doesn't trigger. This card is pretty weak, but since it replaces itself with another card, I would say it is acceptable. I think it's acceptable for being so cheap and replacing itself with a new card that you could run it as kind of a filler-ish sort of a card in your limited decks. So I would rate it probably in the 1.5 range. If it didn't draw a card, I'd probably give it a 0. Hobbyist Artificer. So this is a 1/1 for 1 white. It's an uncommon human artificer. When this dies, create a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. This one is pretty clearly for the Nulvir, the aristocrats. It's not that other colors and groups couldn't make use of this card, but really, this card is very forgettable filler for the other colors and groups and factions. In the deck that wants it, I think it makes the cut most of the time because you need sacrifice fodder. This gives you 2 bodies that you can sacrifice. So For the Nullveer, this guy's probably like a 2.5. Usually makes the cut. Needs some amount of this. For the other colors, he's probably more down in the range of a 1.0. Junk Nester. This is a bird. It's a 1/2 for a white and a colorless. It's a common, has flying. When it enters, you banish one. So you exile the top card. If it's a land, you create a treasure token. And if it's not, you create a trash token. This card's pretty great for the Zarnik Collective. It does the self-banish and you have a chance of getting a trash token. But since you've got a chance at making a treasure token, almost any white deck could benefit from this. So this is a super flexible card. Just works for a number of the different groups. Don't think it ever becomes like a critical piece or a linchpin of any of the strategies. It's a little bit too middling, a little bit too random to do that. But I would say Junk Nester's probably about a 2.0 in virtually any white deck. Marble Dragon, we have a rare. So this is a 5/5 artifact creature dragon for 2 white and 5, 7 mana. It has flying, vigilance, and bulwark 4. Bulwark 4 means whenever it attacks, it gets +0/+4 until end of turn, so it attacks as a 5/9. At the beginning of your upkeep, if this is in your graveyard, you may pay a white and 3 colorless. If you do, return it from your graveyard to your hand. You can also channel this card. You can pay 2 colorless, or generic, I should say, and discard the card. You can banish until you reveal a plains, and then put the plains into your hand. So this is inspired by the Eternal Dragon, which came out around Onslaught block sometime. It has similar stats to that card. It had plane cycling too. Both of the cards don't miss, but this one banishes cards until you hit the planes. The other one just fetches it out of your library. This one's an artifact, whereas the other one was not. This one's cheaper to get back from the graveyard. I believe the Eternal Dragon was 2 white and 3 colorless, so it was 5 mana. More expensive all the way around. And I don't think that card had Vigilance or anything like Bulwark 4. I think it was just a 5/5 flyer. So this card is a little bit better than that card, but that card came out like 20 years ago. And I think it's okay that this card is slightly better than it. For limited, it's going to be great. You know, early in the game, you can make sure you're hitting land drops by channeling it for plains. As long as plains are not just a splash in your deck. And with the double white pips here, white's probably not a splash. It's probably a pretty central color. So I think as long as you're running a fair number of plains in the deck, you don't mind channeling this once or twice. And then in terms of the long game, this is a recursive threat. It can come back from the graveyard over and over again. It's slow, right? When you pay the 4, it comes back to your hand, not to play. But even with it being slow to get it back, it's a giant flying win condition in limited. And I think you would rate this pretty highly for limited. I'm going to call it a 4.0. This is a slower format. I think you have time to get to the shenanigans of the Marble Dragon to be able to cast it. So the long-term recursion, card advantage, inevitability that this represents, along with being able to smooth out your mana along the way, And it doesn't have to be a basic plains. It could get one of the common tap lands. So overall, I think this card is pretty great in Limited. In Constructed, it might be too slow. I think it's interesting in Constructed to consider if there might be something like a mono-white deck that wants to try to channel this over and over again. It's part of a control deck. That could be interesting. So I won't totally rule it out in terms of Constructed play. But for Limited, I think it's a bomb. I think it will be very good there. Nulvir Punisher. This is a 4/3 for a white and 3 colorless. Uncommon Dwarf Warlock. She has pay 1, sacrifice another creature. Nulvir Punisher gains indestructible until end of turn. So you can see the name on the card, Nulvir. And it's a sacrifice outlet. So this is really clearly broadcasting that this is a card for the Nulvir cult. White, black, green. So it gives you a good attacker, it can turn indestructible, and it gives you a sacrifice outlet to turn on all of your aristocrat stuff. It's playable enough stat line and ability and all of that for the other colors and factions, but Nulvir should value this one more highly, whereas those other groups would consider this pretty filler. For the Nulvir, this is probably a pretty great card, probably up in the 2.0 to 2.5 range. And for the other colors, less so. It's probably more like a 1.5 kind of a card if you're not the Nulvir. Overworked Messenger. This is a 1/2 human citizen for a white and a colorless. It's common. He has Bulwark 2. So when he attacks, he gets +2 toughness. He attacks as a 1/4. And when it enters, you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So being a 2-drop that puts a body on the table and draws you a card, every color combination with white is going to play this guy. And they're probably going to play just about every copy they get. Because 2-drops are crucial to establishing the early game. The card draw helps smooth out the rest of the game for you. So probably play about as many copies of this guy as you can get your hands on. That should make him around the range of a 3.5. Preserver Shaman. So this is a giant white card. Literally, she is a giant shaman. She's a 5/4 for 7, white and 6 colorless. She's a common. When she enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, and create a quintessence token. So even if you had nothing to pull back from your graveyard, you could still make the quintessence token, which you could sacrifice to draw a card. By the time you can get her into play at 7 mana, you probably don't need the quintessence for its ability to make colorless anymore. This is a little bit unusual for white. It's a little strange to have cards this big. But this is a new world. The play boosters are structured differently, and white can get 7 drops at common now. The groups who would probably want to play this include the Consortium. Consortium has giant effects and spells that it cares about. It might also be willing to run some of the giant colorless artifact creatures. The colorless faction cares about quintessence. So it's possible that, if you have white in your Thune deck, you might run the Preserver Shaman there to give you another source of quintessence and to give you some long game advantage. And the Roka Guild, white, red, green, has an unusually high number of artifact creatures. that it has access to. And that could let the Preserver Shaman regrow a creature card for you out of the graveyard. That would make it more relevant. So I don't think every combination wants this card, and not every deck necessarily wants a lot of 7-drops in it. For the deck that wants her, that wants to run late and wants to get card advantage, I would say she's probably like a 2.5 in that situation. Probably makes the cut most of the time as a top end. For the decks that don't want her, she's nearly unplayable. You know, if you're running an aggressive deck, you have a low curve, then I would say she's scraping down towards like a 0.5, where you'd only pull her out of the sideboard in a weird matchup. Prototype Weaponsmith. We have a 1/3 for white and 2 colorless, Dwarf Artificer, common. He has Vigilance, and you can pay 2, tap, banish 2. You tap target creature and create a trash token. So this is a Zarnik card. You're exiling your own library, and you're producing trash. This is very much a Zarnik card, even though it doesn't say Zarnik on it. It's not to say other groups might not appreciate something that can tap down creatures. And Roka in particular likes to have artifacts around, so something that makes artifact tokens is good for Roka. But at its core, this is a Zarnik card. So if you're looking for something that turns on all the things, checks all the buttons for the Zarnik collective, then this is one of those cards. I still don't know how many copies you run. You know, I would say for Zarnik, this is a pretty good card. It's a source of trash. Probably rates up at around a 2 or a 2.5. And for other people, less so, like a 1.5. Quintessence Leylines. This is an uncommon enchantment, white and 2 colorless. Whenever a land named Wastes or Snow-Covered Wastes enters the battlefield under your control, create a Quintessence token. Now, obviously, if you have a bunch of Wastes in your deck, then this is pretty strong. Every Quintessence token can be like a clue, but it can also be like treasure of a sort. If your Thune deck has enough white that it has access to this card, then you pick up a bunch of Wastes while you're doing the draft. Then this card could really be a linchpin for a deck like that. It could be really good in that specific instance. But I would say the other decks probably don't want it. If you're not using the colorless cards in the Thune faction, then you're probably not really prioritizing picking up Wastes, and that would mean this card is just junk for you. So I would say for most people, this card's about a 0. But if you're in Thune plus white and maybe another color or two, then if this is going to make you 3 or 4 Quintessence tokens over the course of the game, that's really good. If it just made you 2 Quintessence tokens, it would be probably worth the inclusion. More than that, and it's doing really great things for your deck. So, in that specific deck, this card could be as much as like a 3. You know, something that definitely makes the cut. Reduce to Wreckage. This is a common sorcery, white and 2 colorless. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or a creature with power 4 or greater. You banish 1, then create a trash token. So this one enables Zarnik the most, but everyone to some extent benefits from having removal in their deck. So, and in this set in particular, there are a lot of creatures that have higher power than toughness. So it'll probably be some good targets to hit with this. And as I said, there's quite a few artifacts running around. So, even though this will work the best for a Zarnik deck, I would say that this is probably about a 2.5 for just about anyone. You know, it's going to make the cut up until you have so many bombs and pieces of removal you have to start cutting removal. And for the Zarnik, even better than that. You know, it checks the boxes here of self-banish and making trash tokens. So for the Zarnik, this is easily a 3. Roa Golem. So this is an artifact creature golem. It's an uncommon. It costs a white and 4 colorless. It is a star with vigilance. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control. So Roka's in the name. And the whole game plan of Roka is artifacts matter. Here's one of the payoffs. A giant, vigilant golem, whose power and toughness is only limited by the amount of artifacts you can produce. This card is also sneakily a card for the Zarnik Collective. That's white, blue, green, because they like trash tokens. And since they're going to have a bunch of trash tokens laying around, they can probably get some mileage out of the Roa Golem as well. So, for Roka in particular, this card's probably about a 3.5. For the Zarnik, this is probably about a 3.0. And for everyone else, it depends how many artifacts are showing up in your deck, you know. Could range anywhere from, like, unplayable garbage to, you know, like a 2. If you happen to have a fair number of artifacts laying around, even though you're not one of those 2, then, you know, if you play this and it's going to be like a 4/4 with Vigilance, that's okay. Silent Giant. I have a cycle of vanilla creatures in the set. 1 for each color and for colorless. So this is a 3/4 giant citizen. It's a common for a white and 3 colorless. I think Magic's gotten too complicated in recent years. And the sets that I've made here have a relatively high bar of complexity in terms of, like, tokens. I do have a lot of tokens. I've got some rules that, you know, if you add the reminder text in, the reminder text can make the cards pretty long. So I like to include some simple cards to ease off on the complexity level at times. And having just some vanilla creatures running around, it feels like a wholesome thing for Limited. It makes the set easier to parse when you're new to it and you're trying to draft it. So a 3/4 for 4 is nothing special, but it's playable. It will block well for you. It attacks reasonably well. It is a okay card. It's an okay battlefield presence. Just about definitively filler. You know, right around like a 1.5. You're not embarrassed to have the card in your deck, but you're not glad to have it in the deck either. So, we've looked at a bunch of good 2-drops that'll probably fight this one in terms of finding a spot in your deck. But sometimes if you don't have enough things higher up the curve to try to close out the game or stabilize the board, once in a while a card like this is going to make it in. Start from scratch. This is a rare. It is a sorcery, 2 white and 3 colorless. Destroy all creatures. If you controlled the greatest number of creatures destroyed this way among players, create 2 1/1 white human creature tokens. So this is the sweeper for the set. And it's interesting that rather than trying to like save one of your creatures by making it indestructible or bringing it back from the graveyard, instead, this card will pay you back a little bit if you had gone wider than the opponent by giving you something to start back with after a board reset. And this means you can have chump blockers available if they've got creature lands or haste creatures that are going to come out after the board sweeper. Now again, you only get those creatures if you've gone wider than the opponent, if you had more creatures than they did to start with. But it's an interesting tension built into the card. The flavor of the card is for the Nulvir cult. They have this dream of resetting Veldmar, kind of burning everything to the ground so society can start over. But they're not ready to do that quite yet, because they want to stop the invaders first. Unyielding Angel. So this is a common 2 white, 4 colorless, 4/4 creature angel warrior with flying and vigilance. So this is Serra Angel for 1 more mana at common. How the mighty have fallen. This is not strictly better than Serra Angel. It's not even equal to it. It costs 1 more mana. That being said, the fact that something with Serra Angel's stat line exists at common means we're in a very different era of Magic. I think this is a good, powerful common. I think something that hits like a Serra Angel is still going to be great and limited. And I think getting to 6 mana is pretty reasonable in this format. So I would say this card's around a 3.0. Always makes the cut. You always need some big finishers like this. I don't think it beats out necessarily like the rares and the cards that have really tight synergies with your deck, that sort of thing, but still. I think this card is very, very good. Works in Progress. This is a white and a colorless. It's an instant. It's an uncommon. You create a trash token, a 0/1 colorless wall artifact creature token with Defender, and a 1/1 colorless construct artifact creature token. So, making 3 artifacts in 1 card, this is definitely a Roka Guild card. But making a trash token, it also works well for Zarnik, and making this many chump blockers at instant speed, it's pretty good for just about anyone. So, this card could certainly have constructed applications. In terms of limited, I think if you're in Roka, this card's probably about a 3.5. If you're in Zarnik, it's probably about a 3.0, and for the others, it's probably about a 2.5. You know, it doesn't draw you a card, things like that, but supplies you with chump blockers, surprise blockers at instant speed. Gives you some amount of value. So, yeah, I think this is great for the people who really want it and not bad for everyone else. Zarnik Reclaiming Smelter. This is a rare. It's an artifact. It's a white and a colorless. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a trash token. So you need trash tokens to do anything with this card. If you do, choose one. You can make a 0/1 wall with Defender. You can have a +1/+1 counter on target creature. You can surveil 2. Or you can banish 1, then return target artifact card with mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's a bunch of neat little options. None of them are especially powerful. All of them require trash in order to get it to fire. But it could make you a chump blocker every turn, make +1 counters every turn, give you Surveil 2s, which is a lot of digging to try to find what you want, or reanimating artifacts that cost 2 or less. If you're in Zarnik, where you have a big enough supply of trash coming in, then I think this card will be great. It's more of a constructed card, but in Limited, if you are Zarnik, I think you run this card, because you should have enough trash to pay this off. And then it's, pumping up your creatures, drawing you towards your answers, giving you walls, pulling back your little artifacts. It's pretty great if you're Zarnik. If you're Roka, it depends on how many trash tokens you have in your deck. This is also an artifact, which counts towards your overall artifact count. It's a kind of a even split in terms of what it does for you in Roka. You don't really want to come down on your number of artifacts, but if you're getting them back from the graveyard or you're producing walls, then you're not down any. So if you have enough trash in a Roka deck, then this could be worth your time as well. And for everyone else, this is right around a 0. You need a lot of ways to produce trash in the deck for this card to matter in Limited. I think it could be interesting in Constructed, but for Limited, Zarnik, this is great. It's like a 3.5 in Zarnik, probably. Really good payoff. Maybe even a 4.0. In Roka, it's a bit hit or miss. I'd say a 2.5. Probably makes the deck most of the time, but if you don't have enough trash, probably doesn't. For everyone else, like a 0. And our last card for white, the Zarnik Trash Oracle. So this is white and 2 colorless for a 3/3 human wizard. It's an uncommon. He can tap 3 untapped trash tokens you control to gain 1 life and surveil 1. So, not an embarrassing stat line. Pretty great if you're Zarnik, because now you can take all of your trash and you can be gaining life and filtering your cards. For most of the other colors, he's probably just a 3/3. There's an outside chance that the Roka deck might have enough trash in it to trigger his ability. But usually it's just going to be Zarnik who actually wants this card. In Zarnik, he's probably about a 2.5. I could imagine times where he doesn't make the cut, but I'd say he normally does. And for everyone else, it's probably more like a 1.5. He's a 3/3 for 3. And that brings us to the end of white. So join me next time for blue. And we'll keep going card by card through the whole set until we've talked about every card in defense of Veldmar. If you haven't checked out the earlier videos, you should go ahead. I'd also appreciate it if you give me a like and subscribe. It helps out the channel a bunch. And until next time, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.